The ice-cold water of the Arkansas River hit Delilah Moore like 1,000 knives the moment her wagon wheel shattered against the hidden boulder, sending her tumbling headfirst into the raging spring current that had swelled from snowmelt high in the Rockies. She gasped, swallowing water, her heavy traveling dress pulling her down like an anchor as the current seized her body and dragged her under. The crossing near Cannon City, Colorado, had looked deceptively calm from the bank, but now she understood why the station master had warned her to wait for assistance. Her fingers scraped against smooth river stones as she fought to find purchase, her lungs burning, the roar of water filling her ears. This was how she would die, she thought with sudden clarity, alone in a river 1,000 miles from Boston, drowned before she ever reached her uncle's ranch. Then something massive gripped her around the waist, iron strong arms lifting her up and out of the water's clutches. She broke the surface, gasping and coughing, her vision blurred, but she could feel the solid wall of muscle behind her, could feel herself being held high above the churning water even as the current battered against them both. The man carrying her was moving steadily through the crossing, his footing sure despite the treacherous riverbed, his breathing controlled even as he fought against water that would have swept away most men. "I have got you," a deep voice rumbled against her ear. "Do not fight me, just breathe." Delilah clung to those arms, her fingers digging into flesh as hard as oak, her body shaking violently from cold and shock. The journey across the river seemed to take forever, the man adjusting his grip on her several times to keep her head well above the water, his body taking the full force of the current while he shielded her from the worst of it. She could feel the power in him, the sheer strength required to keep them both upright and moving forward when the river wanted nothing more than to claim them. Finally, blessedly, they reached the far bank. The man carried her up onto dry land before setting her down gently on a patch of grass. Delilah collapsed onto her hands and knees, coughing up river water, her whole body trembling. She heard him moving behind her, heard the splash as he waded back into the shallows, and when she finally managed to look up, she saw him pulling her belongings from the wreckage of her wagon that had wedged against the rocks in the middle of the river. Her first clear look at her rescuer made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than near drowning. He was enormous, well over 6 feet of solid muscle, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the afternoon sun. His hair hung past his shoulders in dark, wet waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy shirt that clung to every ridge and plane of his muscled torso. His arms, bare to the elbow where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with strength, the kind of power that came from years of hard living in the mountains. He waded back to shore carrying her trunk like it weighed nothing, water streaming from his clothes. When he set it down beside her, she got her first look at his face and found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm, gray, blue, and intense beneath dark brows. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, like he did not use it often. Delilah shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. She was still coughing, still shaking, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely think. Without another word, the man moved to his horse, a huge roan stallion that stood ground-tied nearby. He pulled a blanket from his pack and returned to her, draping it around her shoulders. Then he built a fire with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, his movements economical and sure. Within minutes, flames were crackling, and he was guiding her closer to the warmth. "Get out of those wet clothes," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "You will catch your death." Delilah's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy from cold. She managed to shed the heavy outer layers, wrapping herself in the blanket and spreading her clothes near the fire. She was left in her thin chemise and petticoat, both still damp but not waterlogged like her dress had been. "You can turn around now," she managed, her voice hoarse. He did, settling himself on the opposite side of the fire. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, though his eyes held the kind of knowledge that came from hard years. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, and his hands, resting on his knees, were calloused and strong. "Thank you," Delilah said, and then her voice broke. "You saved my life." He nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it without false modesty. "Isaac Anderson," he said. "Most folks call me Isaac." "Delilah Moore. I am traveling to my uncle's ranch, the Moore property about 15 miles west of Cannon City." She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "I thought I could make the crossing. The station master said to wait, but I was impatient. Foolish." "The Arkansas is treacherous this time of year," Isaac said. "Snowmelt from the high country. Current is stronger than it looks." He glanced at the wreckage of her wagon, still visible in the river. "Your team," they bolted before I went in, "ran back toward town, I think. They will likely make it back to the station. Horses are smart about water." He stood, moving to check her clothes. "These will not be dry before nightfall. We are about 3 miles from my cabin. You should come there, get properly warm and dry. I will take you to your uncle's place tomorrow." Delilah hesitated. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men, especially in the wild territories. But this man had just risked his own life to save hers, had shown nothing but respect and practicality. And the alternative was spending the night here beside the river in wet clothes. "I do not want to impose," she said. "No imposition. I was heading home anyway when I saw your wagon go in." He began gathering her belongings, checking each item for water damage. "Your trunk kept most things dry." "Well made." "It was my mother's," Delilah said softly. "One of the few things I brought from Boston." Isaac's eyes flicked to her, a question in them, but he did not pry. Instead, he loaded her trunk onto his horse, then fashioned a sort of sling to carry her other belongings. When he was satisfied everything was secure, he turned back to her. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but I do not have a horse now. You will ride with me." He swung up onto his stallion with easy grace despite his size, then extended his hand down to her. "Come on." Delilah clutched the blanket around herself and took his hand. His grip was warm and sure as he hauled her up in front of him, settling her sideways across his lap. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure, and she found herself pressed against that broad chest, surrounded by his warmth and the smell of leather and pine and something uniquely him. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath stirring her hair. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had never been this close to a man before, had never felt the solid strength of a male body against hers. It should have frightened her, but instead she felt safe, protected in a way she had not felt since her father died 2 years ago. Isaac guided his horse into an easy walk, heading up into the hills that rose from the river valley. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Delilah slowly stopped shaking as Isaac's body heat seeped into her, as the blanket and the afternoon sun combined to drive away the worst of the chill. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked after a while, curious about this silent mountain of a man. 5 years in this cabin. Before that I was farther north, up in the high country, trapped mostly, guided some hunters, did some scouting for the army." "What brought you down here?" He was quiet for a moment. "Wanted something more permanent, a place to call my own. The high country is beautiful, but it is lonely." "And this is not lonely, less so. Town is close enough when I need supplies, far enough when I do not want company." His arm tightened fractionally around her waist as the horse navigated a rocky section of trail. What brings a Boston lady to Colorado in 1876? Delilah had known the question would come. My parents died. Fever took them both within a week of each other last winter. I had no one left in Boston except a cousin who made it clear I was not welcome to stay. My mother's brother, Thomas Moore, owns a ranch out here. He wrote to me, said I could come help him run it. He has no children of his own and he is getting older. I know Thomas Moore. Good man. Honest. You know my uncle. Everyone knows everyone out here one way or another. I have sold him elk and venison before. He mentioned a niece in his letters, but I did not know you were coming. I sent word, but I may have arrived before the letter. I was eager to leave Boston to start fresh somewhere new. She paused. I suppose I was too eager, or I would not have tried that crossing alone. You could not have known about the boulder. It shifted down during the spring floods. Even locals have been taking the long way around to the bridge. Then why were you at the crossing? I know the river. Know where to step. His voice held a hint of dry humor. And I am bigger than most. Harder for the current to sweep away. Delilah found herself smiling despite everything. You certainly are that. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the trail winding up through stands of pine and aspen. Delilah saw deer moving in the shadows, heard the call of birds settling for the evening. The air smelled clean and sharp, so different from the coal smoke and sewage of Boston. She had thought she would miss the city, but breathing this mountain air, she felt like she was finally coming home. Isaac's cabin appeared as they crested a small ridge. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. A lean-to stable stood nearby, along with a shed and what looked like a smokehouse. The clearing had been carved from the forest with care, leaving tall pines standing like sentinels around the edges. A creek bubbled past one side of the property, its water clear and quick. It is beautiful, Delilah breathed. It serves, Isaac said, but she could hear the pride in his voice. He dismounted and lifted her down, his hands spanning her waist easily. For a moment they stood close, and Delilah found herself looking up into his face, seeing the concern there, the lingering worry. You are sure you are all right? He asked quietly. The river did not hurt you. I am fine. Thanks to you. He held her gaze a moment longer, then stepped back, turning to tend to his horse. Delilah stood wrapped in her blanket, watching him work. He moved with the same efficiency he had shown at the river, unsaddling the stallion, rubbing him down, checking his hooves. The horse clearly trusted him, standing quiet under his hands. When the horse was settled in the lean-to with feed and water, Isaac gathered Delilah's belongings and led her to the cabin. Inside was neat and spare, furnished with handmade furniture that was rough but sturdy. A large fireplace dominated one wall, a bed stood in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs sat near the window. Shelves held supplies and a few books, and pelts were stacked in another corner, ready for trading. Not what you are used to, Isaac said, setting down her trunk. It is wonderful, Delilah said honestly. It feels like a real home. He looked at her, something shifting in his expression, then moved to build up the fire. You can sleep in the bed, I will take the floor. There is a screen you can use for privacy. He indicated a folding screen in the corner. I have some stew left from yesterday. Are you hungry? Delilah realized she was starving. Very. Isaac heated the stew over the fire while Delilah stood wrapped in her blanket, watching him move around the small space. For such a large man, he was surprisingly graceful, never bumping into anything, his movements controlled and precise. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, along with thick slices of bread. The stew was rich with venison and vegetables, seasoned with herbs Delilah did not recognize. She ate ravenously, too hungry to be polite, and Isaac watched her with what might have been amusement in his eyes. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "Hunting has its advantages." "Did you make the bread too?" "I am not completely helpless in a kitchen." He paused. "Though I admit I miss real cooking sometimes. A woman's touch in a place makes a difference." Delilah looked around the cabin with new eyes, seeing how sparse it truly was despite being clean and well-maintained. No curtains on the windows, no decorations, nothing soft or beautiful, just the bare necessities for survival. "How long since you have had that? A woman's touch?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "My mother died when I was 12. I left home at 15, so over a decade now. No wife. No, this life is not easy. Most women want more than a cabin in the woods and a man who disappears into the mountains for weeks at a time." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Delilah heard the loneliness beneath the words. "Some women might appreciate the honesty and strength of it," she said softly. "Might prefer it to false refinement and empty promises." Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. Isaac looked away first, clearing his throat. "Your clothes should be dry by morning. I will ride with you to your uncle's ranch at first light. Thank you for everything." After they ate, Isaac showed her where everything was, then excused himself to tend to evening chores. Delilah found a dry dress in her trunk and changed behind the screen, grateful to be in proper clothes again. She spread her wet things to finish drying by the fire, then explored the cabin more thoroughly. The books on the shelf surprised her. Poetry by Longfellow and Whitman, a volume of Shakespeare, a well-worn Bible, and several books on natural history and wilderness survival. She pulled down the Whitman and was flipping through it when Isaac returned. "You like poetry?" she asked. He looked almost embarrassed. "My mother taught me to read from her poetry books. I guess the habit stuck. I love poetry. My mother and I used to read together every evening." Delilah traced the worn cover. "I brought some of her books with me, but they are in the trunk and I do not want to dig through it now. You can read that one if you like. I know most of it by heart anyway." They spent the evening in companionable quiet, Delilah reading while Isaac worked on repairing a bridle. The firelight flickered warm around them, and Delilah found herself stealing glances at this unexpected man. He was so different from the refined gentlemen of Boston, with their soft hands and softer lives. Isaac was all hard edges and solid strength, a man shaped by the wilderness, but there was gentleness in him too, evident in the way he had cared for her, in the poetry he kept on his shelf. When full dark had fallen, Isaac stood and began preparing the bed for her, shaking out blankets and furs. "This is really not necessary," Delilah protested. "I can sleep on the floor. This is your home. You nearly drowned today. You need proper rest." His tone brooked no argument. "I have slept on harder surfaces than a cabin floor, believe me." Delilah wanted to argue further but found herself yawning instead. The exhaustion of the day was catching up with her, her body demanding rest now that she was warm and safe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are very kind." "Just trying to be decent." "You are more than decent, Isaac Anderson. You are a good man." He looked at her with those storm-colored eyes, and Delilah felt her breath catch. Then he turned away, busying himself with arranging his bedroll on the floor. Delilah settled into the bed, which smelled of pine and leather and that indefinable scent that was purely Isaac. The furs were warm, the mattress stuffed with sweet-smelling grass and softer than she had expected. She listened to Isaac banking the fire, heard him settle onto his bedroll with a quiet sigh. "Isaac," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for holding me above the water, for not letting go." There was a long pause. "I would never have let you go, Delilah, not for anything." His words warmed her more than any fire could have. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Morning light streamed through the window, and Delilah sat up to find Isaac already dressed and moving around the cabin. He had clearly been up for hours. His hair was tied back, and he had trimmed his beard slightly, though it was still thick and dark. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Morning. Your clothes are dry. I brought in some water for washing." He indicated a basin he had set up behind the screen. "Breakfast will be ready soon." Delilah washed quickly and dressed in one of her simpler day dresses, a deep blue cotton that her cousin in Boston had declared too plain for polite society. She brushed out her long, dark hair and braided it simply, no longer having the patience for the elaborate styles her mother had favored. When she emerged from behind the screen, she found Isaac watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "The blue suits you," he said gruffly. "Matches your eyes." Delilah felt herself blush. "Thank you." They ate breakfast together, and Delilah noticed Isaac kept glancing at her, as if making sure she was truly all right. When they finished, he helped her pack her belongings back into her trunk, handling even her delicate things with surprising care. "Your uncle's place is about 2 hours from here," Isaac said as he loaded her trunk onto a pack horse he had brought out. "The trail is good. We should make it before noon." They rode out together, Delilah on a gentle mare Isaac said he kept for trading purposes, Isaac on his big roan. The morning was clear and bright, the air crisp with the promise of summer. As they rode, Isaac pointed out landmarks, teaching her about the country. "That peak there, that is Mount Antero. Good hunting in those foothills. The creek that feeds your uncle's property comes down from there, so the water is always cold and clean. Do you hunt there often?" "Few times a year. I will show you sometime if you like. The wildflowers in the high meadows in July are something to see." "I would like that very much." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses picking their way along the trail. Delilah found herself watching Isaac, admiring the easy way he sat his horse, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert but not anxious. He belonged to this land in a way she had never belonged anywhere. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Sure." "Yesterday at the river, you did not hesitate, you just came in after me." "Why?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. "Saw you go in, saw the current take you." "There was no time to think about it, I just moved." "You could have died. That current could have taken us both." "Could have," he agreed, "but it did not." "Are you always so calm about risking your life?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I have risked my life for a lot less important reasons than saving someone from drowning. Seemed like an easy choice." "Well, I am glad you made it. The choice, I mean." "So am I." The trail wound down into a broad valley where cattle grazed, and Delilah could see a ranch house in the distance, small but well-maintained, with a barn and several outbuildings. "That is your uncle's place," Isaac said, pointing. As they drew closer, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. He was in his 50s, Delilah guessed, with graying hair and a weathered face. When he recognized her, his face broke into a smile. "Delilah, you are here." Thomas Moore strode toward them, then his smile faded as he took in the circumstances of her arrival. "What happened? Where is your wagon, Uncle Thomas?" Delilah slid down from the mare and found herself enveloped in her uncle's embrace. He smelled of hay and horses, and something that reminded her strongly of her mother. "I am afraid I made a terrible mistake at the river crossing. My wagon went in. If Isaac had not been there, I would have drowned." Thomas turned to Isaac, who had dismounted and was unloading Delilah's trunk. "Isaac Anderson, Should have known. Man seems to make a habit of being in the right place at the right time. He extended his hand and Isaac shook it firmly. I owe you a debt I cannot repay. No debt, Isaac said. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone could have done what you did, from what I am hearing. The Arkansas is running high and fast this year. Thomas turned back to Delilah. Are you all right, child? Not hurt, just shaken. Isaac took care of me, let me stay at his cabin last night so I could dry out and rest. Thomas nodded approvingly. Good man. Come inside, both of you. We will have coffee and you can tell me everything. They followed Thomas into the ranch house, which was larger inside than it looked from outside. It was furnished simply but comfortably, with touches that spoke of a woman's presence long ago. Delilah guessed her aunt had decorated before she died. Over coffee and fresh cake that Thomas admitted he had bought in town specifically for Delilah's arrival, they told the story of the river crossing. Thomas grew grave as he heard the details. Damn fool thing, trying that crossing alone, he said, but his voice was gentle. But you did not know, and you are safe now. That is what matters. He looked at Isaac. You will stay for lunch, I hope. It is the least I can offer. I should get back, Isaac said, but Delilah could hear the reluctance in his voice. Please stay, she said softly. I would like you to. Isaac's eyes met hers, and something passed between them again, that electric connection she did not fully understand but could not deny. All right, he agreed. For a little while. Thomas, who missed nothing, looked between them with interest but said nothing. Instead, he showed Delilah to her room, a sunny space at the back of the house that looked out over the mountains. Her trunk was already there, carried in by Isaac when she was not looking. Your mother would be glad to know you are here, Thomas said quietly. She always loved this place. Used to visit when we were children before she married your father and moved east. She talked about it sometimes, said the mountains called to her. They are calling to you too, I can hear it in your voice. Thomas smiled. Get settled, freshen up. Lunch will be ready soon. Delilah unpacked a few things, changed into a fresh dress, and washed her face and hands. When she emerged, she found Isaac on the porch talking with her uncle about cattle and grazing conditions. He looked up when she appeared, and his eyes tracked her movement as she joined them. Lunch was simple but good, venison steaks with potatoes and greens from Thomas's garden. The men talked about the area, about hunting and ranching, and Delilah listened, learning. She asked questions too about the ranch, about what her uncle needed help with, and Thomas seemed pleased by her interest. Most of the work is managing the herd, making sure they have good grazing and water, Thomas explained. We have got about 200 head now. I have got 2 hands who help with the heavy work, but I need someone to help with the books, the planning, someone I can trust. I am good with numbers, Delilah said. Father taught me to manage the household accounts. I can learn the rest. I know you can. You have got your mother's steel in you. Thomas glanced at Isaac. You looking for work this summer by any chance? I could use an extra hand for the drive to the rail station in August. Isaac hesitated. I do not usually hire on. I prefer to work for myself. I would pay fair. And you would be helping Delilah get established here. Something shifted in Isaac's expression. I will think on it. After lunch, Isaac prepared to leave. Delilah walked with him to where his horses waited. Thank you again, she said, for everything. I know I have said it before, but I cannot say it enough. You do not need to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. You gave me my life back. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. I hope I will see you again. Your uncle trades with me regular. I bring him meat, he gives me supplies. So yes, you will see me again. Isaac covered her hand with his touch warm and careful. Take care of yourself, Delilah Moore. You too, Isaac Anderson. He mounted his roan and rode away, leading the pack horse. Delilah stood watching until he disappeared into the trees, feeling strangely bereft. "You like him," Thomas said from behind her. "It was not a question. I barely know him." "Sometimes that does not matter. Sometimes you just know." Thomas put a hand on her shoulder. "He is a good man, Delilah. Honest and true. Not many like him left in this world. He saved my life. He did. And I think maybe you might save his too in a different way." Delilah looked at her uncle in confusion, but Thomas just smiled and headed back to the barn, leaving her to ponder his words. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Delilah threw herself into learning the ranch, riding out with Thomas to check the herd, studying his books and records, meeting the 2 ranch hands who worked for him. Jake and Pete were both in their 40s, weathered cowboys who treated her with respect tinged with curiosity. They were not used to women who wanted to learn ranch work, but they taught her patiently when they saw she was serious. Delilah learned to ride better, to spot sick cattle, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. She took over the books completely, organizing them in a way that made Thomas shake his head in wonder. She cooked meals, tended a garden, and slowly began to feel like this was truly her home. But she thought about Isaac constantly. She found herself looking up whenever she heard hoofbeats, hoping to see his big roan coming down the trail. She dreamed about the river, about strong arms holding her safe, about storm-colored eyes and a deep voice saying he would never let her go. 3 weeks after her arrival, Isaac finally appeared. Delilah was in the garden when she heard the horses, and she looked up to see him riding in with a deer carcass tied to the pack horse. Her heart leaped in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with joy. Thomas came out of the barn to greet Isaac, and they conducted their business while Delilah watched from the garden, trying not to be too obvious about it. When they finished, Isaac looked around the yard, clearly searching for something. For her, she realized. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and walked over. Isaac's eyes lit up when he saw her, a smile breaking across his bearded face. "Delilah, you look well." "I am well." "The ranch agrees with me," she smiled up at him. "How have you been?" "Good, busy. Hunting has been good this year." They stood awkwardly, both wanting to say more but not knowing how to begin. Thomas, watching them with poorly concealed amusement, cleared his throat. "Why do you not stay for supper, Isaac? Delilah has been cooking, and she is even better at it than her aunt was. God rest her soul." "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing if we are inviting you," Delilah said firmly. "Please stay. I want to hear what you have been doing." "All right then. Thank you." Supper that night was one of the happiest meals Delilah could remember. She had made a roast with vegetables and biscuits that came out perfectly golden. Isaac praised everything, and Thomas told stories about the early days of the ranch, making them both laugh. After the meal, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, and Delilah felt a contentment she had not known was possible. "I have been thinking about your offer," Isaac said to Thomas, "about helping with the drive. If you still need someone, I am willing." "I do need someone. You would be a godsend, honestly. Jake is getting too old for the long drives, though he would never admit it. When do you plan to go?" "First week of August. Takes about 5 days to get the herd to the rail station and back." "I can do it." Delilah felt her heart lift. 5 days with Isaac nearby, working alongside him. She tried not to let her excitement show too obviously. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Thomas excused himself, claiming he needed to check on something in the barn. Delilah suspected he was just giving them privacy, and she was grateful for it. "I have thought about you," Isaac said quietly once they were alone. "About that day at the river, about you in my cabin. I have thought about you too, constantly, if I am being honest." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. Delilah, I am not a man who is good with words. I am rough and unrefined. I live hard and simple, but I need to tell you something. What? When I pulled you from that river, when I held you above the water, something changed in me. I have never felt so terrified in my life, so desperate to keep someone safe. And then at my cabin, watching you sleep, seeing you in my space, I could not stop thinking about what it would be like if you stayed. If you were there every night. Delilah's breath caught. Isaac. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I have never felt this way before, and I think you feel it too, this pull between us. I do feel it. From the moment you lifted me from the water, I have felt connected to you in a way I cannot explain. Isaac reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite his calluses. I want to court you properly, if you will let me, if your uncle approves. My uncle likes you very much, and I would like nothing more than for you to court me. In the starlight, Isaac smiled, and Delilah saw the loneliness in him begin to ease, replaced by hope. The summer that followed was the most magical time of Delilah's life. Isaac came to the ranch several times a week, always bringing meat or fish or wild berries he had gathered. He taught Delilah to fish in the creek, to identify edible plants, to read the weather in the clouds. They rode together into the high country, and he showed her the meadows full of wildflowers he had promised, spreading as far as the eye could see in waves of purple and gold. Thomas watched their courtship with approval, seeing how gentle Isaac was with Delilah, how protective. He saw the way Delilah bloomed under Isaac's attention, growing more confident and happy with each passing day. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their dreams. Delilah told Isaac about her childhood in Boston, about losing her parents, about feeling lost and alone until she came west. Isaac told her about growing up rough, about his years in the mountains, about the loneliness that had been his constant companion until the day he pulled her from the river. I think I was waiting for you, he said one evening as they sat by the creek. All those years alone, I was just waiting for the woman who would understand this life, who would want to share it with me. I was lost until I found you, Delilah said softly, or until you found me. Their first kiss happened on a warm July evening, under a sky full of stars. Isaac had been teaching Delilah to identify constellations, standing behind her and guiding her hand to point at different stars. She turned in his arms, looked up into his face, and he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she did not pull away. She rose on her toes and met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then it deepened, and Delilah felt heat flood through her entire body. Isaac's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she could feel the rapid beat of his heart against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you go into that river and knew I would die before I let it take you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Do not be scared. I will never hurt you. I will spend the rest of my life keeping you safe and happy. When August came and the cattle drive began, Delilah insisted on going along. Thomas was dubious at first, but she proved herself capable, riding hard alongside the men, helping manage the herd. Isaac stayed close to her, protective but not overbearing, and she loved watching him work, seeing the strength and skill that made him such a valuable asset. The nights on the drive were her favorite. They camped under the stars, and after the herd settled, Isaac would find her and they would talk quietly, steal kisses when no one was looking, plan their future together. I want to expand my place, Isaac told her one night. Build a bigger cabin, one that is worthy of a wife. Add a room for children when they come, maybe start a small herd of our own. That sounds wonderful. I could help. I am good with accounts now, thanks to Uncle Thomas. We would make a good team. We already do. The drive was successful, the cattle bringing good prices at the rail station. On the way back, Thomas rode alongside Isaac and Delilah. "I have been thinking," he said. "This ranch will be yours someday, Delilah, when I am gone, but that does not mean you have to wait for me to die to start building your own life. Uncle Thomas, I do not want to think about you dying. We all die eventually. But what I am trying to say is, if you and Isaac want to marry, want to start your own place, I will help you. I can give you some cattle to start with, help you build. You have earned it, both of you." Delilah looked at Isaac, who was staring at Thomas with surprise. "That is generous," Isaac said slowly. "Very generous, but I have some savings. I do not need charity." "It is not charity. It is family helping family, which you will be once you marry my niece, assuming you are planning to ask her properly." Isaac looked at Delilah, his eyes intense. "I am planning to ask her as soon as we get back. Was going to ask your permission first, but you seem to be giving it." "I am. You have my blessing for what it is worth." "It is worth everything," Delilah said, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Uncle Thomas." They reached the ranch 3 days later, dusty and tired but happy. That evening, after they had cleaned up and eaten, Isaac asked Delilah to walk with him. They wandered to the creek, to the spot that had become their special place, and Isaac took both her hands in his. "I do not have a ring yet," he said, "but I could not wait any longer to ask. Delilah Moore, will you marry me? Will you share my life, build a home with me, grow old with me?" "Yes," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Isaac pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and longing into it. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. "I will make you happy," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives. You already make me happy. You have since the moment you held me above that river current and refused to let me go." They were married in September, in a simple ceremony at the church in Cannon City. Thomas gave Delilah away, and half the town seemed to turn up to witness the mountain man, and the Boston lady pledged their lives to each other. Delilah wore a simple white dress she had made herself, and Isaac wore new trousers and a clean shirt, his hair neatly trimmed, though he had kept the beard she loved. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The celebration afterward was lively, with music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. But Delilah only had eyes for her husband, for the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. They spent their wedding night at Isaac's cabin, which he had been steadily improving all summer. He had added a proper bed frame, real windows with glass, curtains Delilah had sewn. She had brought some of her things from the ranch, adding feminine touches that made the space feel like a true home. Isaac carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently inside. The fire was already lit, casting warm light around the room. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, cupping her face in his hands. "A little, are you? Terrified? I do not want to hurt you, do not want to do anything wrong. We will figure it out together. That is what marriage is it not?" Learning together, he kissed her then, slow and deep, and Delilah felt herself melt into him. They undressed each other carefully, Isaac's hands gentle despite their strength. When he laid her on the bed and covered her body with his, Delilah felt no fear, only love and trust and anticipation. Their lovemaking was tender, Isaac moving slowly, constantly checking to make sure she was all right. There was pain at first, but it faded into pleasure, into a closeness Delilah had never imagined possible. Afterward they lay tangled together, Isaac stroking her hair, both of them filled with wonder at what they had shared. "I love you," Delilah whispered against his chest. "My mountain man, my rescuer. I love you, my Delilah, my wife. You saved me just as surely as I saved you in that river." The months that followed were filled with hard work and deep happiness. With Thomas's help and some of Isaac's savings, they began expanding the cabin, adding rooms and improving the property. Thomas made good on his promise, giving them 20 head of cattle to start their own small herd. Isaac continued to hunt and trap, and Delilah managed their finances and helped with the ranch work. Winter came, and Delilah discovered she was pregnant. Isaac was overjoyed, his protectiveness increasing tenfold. He hovered over her constantly, insisting she rest more, work less. Delilah found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one snowy evening. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. You are not just any woman. You are my woman, my wife. I almost lost you once. I will not risk losing you again." "You are not going to lose me. I am strong, Isaac. You know I am." "I know, but let me worry anyway. It is what husbands do." Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1877, with Thomas and the local midwife in attendance. Isaac paced outside the cabin, nearly wearing a hole in the porch, until he heard the baby's first cry. When the midwife finally let him in, he found Delilah exhausted but glowing, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Isaac knelt beside the bed, looking at his child with wonder. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark blue eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as his father's. "He is perfect," Isaac breathed. "You are perfect. Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for this gift." They named him James, after Delilah's father, and he was the light of their lives. Isaac was a devoted father, gentle despite his size and strength. Delilah would often find him sitting outside with James cradled in his massive arms, talking to the baby about the mountains and the animals, about growing up to be a good man. Thomas doted on his great-nephew, declaring him the finest boy ever born. The ranch and their small holding both prospered, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Isaac's mother. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, but her father's fierce spirit. Isaac adored her, this tiny girl who fearlessly climbed on him like he was a mountain to be conquered. More years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and injured horses, all the struggles of frontier life. But through it all, Isaac and Delilah stood together, their love deepening with each passing season. Thomas grew older but remained active on his ranch, with Jake and Pete still working for him. He divided his time between his place and Isaac and Delilah's, unable to stay away from his great-niece and great-nephew for long. When James was 5 and Sarah 3, Delilah gave birth to another boy, Samuel. And 3 years after that, twin girls arrived, Alice and Emma, completing their family. Their cabin had grown into a proper house by then, with multiple bedrooms and a large main room where the family gathered in the evenings. Isaac had built much of it himself, with help from Thomas and the ranch hands. It stood solid and strong, like the man who had built it, a testament to hard work and love. On warm evenings, the family would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Isaac would hold Delilah's hand, and they would watch their children play, marveling at how full their lives had become. "You ever think about that day at the river?" Delilah asked one such evening when the children were older and playing down by the creek under Sarah's watchful eye. "Every day," Isaac said. "It was the day my life truly began, mine too. I was so lost before I came here, before I found you, we found each other. Or maybe fate put me at that crossing at exactly the right moment." I like to think it was fate, that we were always meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. Isaac pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against him the way she always had. I would do it again, he said quietly. Go into that river, fight that current, anything. 1,000 times over to have this, to have you. I know, and I would trust you to catch me, every single time. Thomas Moore passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1889, leaving his ranch to Delilah as he had always planned. James was 12 by then, old enough to understand death, and he grieved deeply for the great uncle who had taught him to ride and rope. The whole family mourned, but they celebrated Thomas's life too, remembering his kindness and wisdom. They merged the two properties, creating one of the most successful ranches in the area. Jake and Pete retired with generous pensions, and Isaac took on new hands to help with the expanding operation. James showed a natural talent for ranch work and took on more responsibilities as he grew. Sarah, fiercely intelligent, kept the books with her mother. Samuel loved the horses and became their primary trainer. The twins, Alice and Emma, were still young but showed promise in everything they tried. As the years passed and their children grew, Isaac's hair began to gray at the temples and lines appeared around Delilah's eyes. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by years of partnership and devotion. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, their children planned a celebration. The whole community came to honor the couple who had become pillars of the area. There was music and dancing, just like at their wedding, and their children presented them with a beautiful quilt they had all worked on together, each square representing a memory from their family's history. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Isaac and Delilah walked down to the creek, to the spot where he had proposed. 20 years, Delilah marveled. It has gone so fast. The best years of my life, mine too. I cannot imagine what my life would have been if I had not tried to cross that river, if you had not been there. I can. You would have found your way eventually. You are too strong, too determined not to. Maybe, but I am glad I found my way to you. Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her close. When I pulled you from that water, when I held you above the current, I did not know I was holding my entire future. Everything that mattered, everything I would ever need, was right there in my arms. You have held me safe ever since. Through everything, you have been my rock, my protector, my love. And you have been my light, showing me what it means to truly live, to build something lasting and good. They kissed under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully. The fruits of their labor and love spread across the land they had built together. James eventually took over the ranch, marrying a sweet girl from town and having children of his own. Sarah married a teacher and moved to Denver but visited often. Samuel married his childhood sweetheart and started his own horse breeding operation on part of the family land. The twins both found love and happiness in their own ways, one becoming a doctor, the other a teacher. Isaac and Delilah grew old together, their love story becoming legend in the area. People spoke of the mountain man who had risked everything to save the Boston lady from the river, and how that moment had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime. In the spring of 1914, when Delilah was in her late 50s and Isaac in his early 60s, they took a ride together up to the high country. They were both still strong and active, though their movements were slower than they once had been. They rode to the meadow full of wildflowers, now in full bloom, and dismounted to walk through the sea of color. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Isaac asked, taking her hand. "Of course. I thought it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I still do." I wanted to impress you. You did. You have impressed me every day since." They sat in the flowers, Delilah leaning against Isaac's chest, his arms around her. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about all the memories they had made together. "If I could go back," Delilah said quietly, "back to that moment when I decided to cross the river alone, I would do it all exactly the same. Because it led me here to you, to this beautiful life we have built. Even the scary parts, almost drowning, even those. Because you were there to hold me above the water. You have been holding me above the hard parts of life ever since, making sure I never go under. We hold each other up. That is what we do." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Then they rode home together, to the house that had sheltered their love for so many years, to the family that was their greatest achievement. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more joy, more memories. Isaac and Delilah remained active and involved in their children's lives, beloved grandparents who always had time for a story or a hug. When Isaac was 70 and Delilah 65, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The celebration was enormous, with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filling their home and spilling out into the yard. The entire community came to honor them, these two people whose love had become the stuff of legend. During the celebration, their oldest grandson asked Isaac to tell the story of how he and Delilah met. Isaac looked at his wife, and she nodded, smiling. "Your grandmother tried to cross the Arkansas River when it was running high with spring snowmelt," Isaac began, and the children gathered close to listen. "She went in, and the current tried to take her. But I was there, and I went in after her. I held her above the water the whole way across, and I knew even then that I would never let her go." "Was it hard?" one of the children asked. "The hardest thing I had ever done, but also the easiest because it was for her. When you love someone the way I love your grandmother, you find strength you did not know you had." Delilah reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "And I have loved him every day since," she said softly. "He saved my life that day, but he has given me so much more than that. He has given me a home, a family, a purpose. He has given me everything that matters." The children listened, wide-eyed, already imagining the story they would tell their own children someday. The story of the mountain man and the Boston lady, and the river that brought them together. As the years advanced, Isaac and Delilah grew frail, but their minds remained sharp and their love unwavering. They spent their days on the porch they had built together so many years ago, watching their legacy unfold around them. They saw their great-grandchildren play in the creek where they had courted, saw the ranch continue to prosper under James's capable management, saw their other children living happy, productive lives. On a warm September evening in 1925, 50 years after they had first married, Delilah sat beside Isaac on their porch. He was 80 years old now, his hair white as snow, but his eyes were still that same storm gray that had captivated her half a century ago. Delilah was 75, her dark hair now silver, her movements slower but her spirit as fierce as ever. "Tell me again," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder. "Tell me about the river." Isaac smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I saw you go in, saw the current take you. And I knew I had to save you. So I went in after you and I held you above the water, no matter how hard the river fought to pull us both down. I held you the whole way across, because letting you go was not an option. It never has been." "My mountain man," Delilah murmured. "You have held me safe for 50 years. And I will hold you safe forever, in this life and whatever comes after." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains they both loved, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy they had built. And in that moment, they were not 80 and 75. They were young again, meeting for the first time, falling in love by a river that had tried to separate them, but instead had bound them together for all time. Isaac Anderson and Delilah Moore lived out their remaining years in peace and happiness, surrounded by love. When they finally passed, within months of each other as old couples sometimes do, they left behind a family that stretched across 3 generations, a ranch that was prosperous and thriving, and a love story that would be told and retold for generations to come. The story of the current that nearly pulled her under, and the mountain man who held her above it the whole way over, became more than just a tale. It became a testament to the power of love, to the strength found in partnership, to the beautiful life that can grow from a single moment of courage and connection. Their graves were placed side by side on a hill overlooking the creek where they had courted, where Isaac had proposed, where they had built their life together. The headstone read simply, Isaac Anderson and Delilah Moore Anderson, together in life, together in eternity. The river could not take them. And on warm summer evenings, when the light slants golden across the meadows and the creek babbles softly, people say you can still feel their presence there. The mountain man and his Boston lady, holding each other close, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves. Their children and grandchildren continued the ranch, keeping the family legacy alive. The story of Isaac and Delilah was passed down through generations, each telling adding new details but always keeping the heart of it the same. The moment when a man saw a woman in trouble and risked everything to save her, and how that single act of courage sparked a love that transformed 2 lives into something greater than either could have imagined alone. The cabin where they had spent their first night together, where Isaac had given Delilah shelter and warmth, was preserved by the family. It became a special place where engaged couples would visit before their weddings, seeking the blessing of Isaac and Delilah's enduring love. Inside, the family kept Isaac's poetry books and Delilah's first journal from when she arrived in Colorado, precious artifacts of a love that had shaped an entire family's history. James Anderson, their eldest son, lived to be 93, and he never tired of telling stories about his parents. He remembered his father's strength and gentleness, how Isaac could fell a tree with an axe and then cradle a baby with infinite tenderness. He remembered his mother's courage and wisdom, how Delilah had adapted from a Boston lady to a rancher's wife without ever losing her grace or kindness. My father always said that the river brought them together, James would tell his own grandchildren. But I think it was more than that. I think they were always meant to find each other. The river was just the way fate made it happen. The Anderson Ranch grew to become one of the most respected in Colorado, known not just for the quality of their cattle and horses, but for the integrity and kindness of the family that ran it. People said that Isaac and Delilah had built more than just a ranch. They had built a legacy of love and honor that continued to guide their descendants. Sarah Anderson, who became a teacher and eventually a principal in Denver, often told her students about her parents' love story. She used it to teach about courage, about how love requires bravery, how it means risking yourself for another person. Her students were always captivated, especially when she brought in the actual blanket that Isaac had wrapped around her mother that first night, preserved carefully all these years. Samuel Anderson, who inherited his father's way with horses, named his most successful breeding line River Crossing, in honor of the day his parents met. His horses became famous throughout Colorado and beyond, known for their strength and steadiness. Like my father, Samuel would say with pride. Strong enough to weather any current. The twins, Alice and Emma, though they pursued different paths, both named their daughters Delilah, ensuring that their mother's name would continue through the generations. They both became advocates for women's rights, inspired by their mother's example of strength and independence. "She crossed a continent alone," they would say. "She rebuilt her life in a strange land. She showed us that women are capable of anything." As the 20th century progressed, and the wild frontier gave way to modern civilization, the story of Isaac and Delilah Anderson became even more precious to their descendants. It was a reminder of where they came from, of the strength and love that had founded their family. On the 100th anniversary of that fateful day at the river crossing, in 1976, the family gathered at the ranch for a massive reunion. Over 200 descendants of Isaac and Delilah came from all over the country. They held a ceremony at the creek, and the family patriarch, Isaac's great-grandson who bore his name, told the story once more to a new generation. "100 years ago today," he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "a woman tried to cross a river and a man saved her life. From that moment came all of us. Every person standing here exists because Isaac Anderson refused to let Delilah Moore drown, because he held her above the current and brought her safely to shore, because they fell in love and built a life together that has echoed down through the decades." He paused, looking around at the faces young and old, seeing the echo of Isaac's storm-gray eyes and Delilah's dark beauty in a dozen different combinations. "We are their legacy, every one of us. And the greatest gift we can give them is to live with the same courage, the same love, the same commitment to family that they showed us. To hold each other up when the current gets strong. To never let go, no matter how hard life tries to pull us apart." The family cheered, and then they shared a feast beside the creek, telling stories and making new memories on the land that Isaac and Delilah had made their own so long ago. As the sun set that evening, the current great-grandchildren asked to see the exact spot where Isaac had pulled Delilah from the water. The family walked to the river crossing, which had been bridged for decades now, but was still recognizable from the old stories. They stood on the bank, and the oldest family members pointed out where the wagon had gone in, where Isaac had entered the water, the path he had taken across. The river ran lower and quieter now than it had that spring day in 1876, but everyone could imagine it swollen and dangerous, could picture the courage it had taken for one man to wade into that current and save a woman he did not even know. "He was a hero," one of the young children said. "He was," the child's grandmother agreed. "But more than that, he was a good man who saw someone in need and did not hesitate to help. That is the real lesson, not just grand gestures, but everyday kindness and courage." As darkness fell and the family began to disperse, heading back to the ranch house or to hotels in town, a few people stayed behind at the river. They were the dreamers, the romantics, the ones who felt the weight of the past most keenly. They stood in silence, listening to the water flow past, and they thought about love and courage and the way a single moment can change everything. They thought about Isaac, young and strong, wading into dangerous water without hesitation. They thought about Delilah, frightened but determined, rebuilding her life in a strange land. They thought about the 50 years they had spent together, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through every trial, and they felt grateful. Grateful for the river that had brought Isaac and Delilah together. Grateful for the courage that had saved a life and sparked a love story. Grateful for the legacy of strength and devotion that continued to guide them all. The story of current nearly pulled her under at the crossing. Mountain Man held her above it the whole way over was more than just a family tale. It had become a metaphor, A reminder that when life threatens to pull you under, when the current gets too strong to fight alone, the right person will hold you up, will refuse to let you go, will carry you safely to the other shore. Isaac and Delilah Anderson had lived that truth every day of their marriage. They had held each other above the currents of grief and hardship, of loss and fear. They had carried each other through 50 years of life, building something beautiful and lasting together. And their descendants, standing by the river in the gathering darkness, made a silent promise to honor that legacy, to love as deeply as Isaac and Delilah had loved, to hold on as tightly as they had held on, to build lives and families that would make their ancestors proud. The river flowed on, as it had for millennia, as it would for millennia to come. But for one brief, shining moment in 1876, it had brought together two souls who were meant to be one. And from that moment had grown a love that would never die, a legacy that would never fade, a story that would be told as long as there were Andersons to tell it. The mountain man and the Boston lady. The river that tried to part them and instead bound them together. The current that nearly pulled her under and the strong arms that held her above it the whole way over. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was their eternal gift to all who came after. A reminder that true love endures, that courage matters, that one moment of selfless bravery can echo through the generations, creating ripples that touch lives not yet lived, shaping futures not yet imagined. And so the story ended where it began, at a river crossing in Colorado, where the water runs cold and clear, where the mountains stand eternal, where two hearts found each other and never let go, where love proved stronger than any current, any obstacle, any challenge that life could bring, where Isaac Anderson held Delilah Moore above the water and carried her not just across a river, but into a lifetime of love, partnership, and unshakable devotion that would stand as an example for all their descendants for all time. Their love story was complete, their legacy secure, their happily ever after earned through courage, devotion, and an unwavering commitment to holding each other up, no matter what currents tried to pull them down.